every doctor, every team, every office manager likes to say and to think that they are a patient-centric practice. But if I walked in the front door of your office today, if I called your practice today, if I were to interact with the people who go to your office frequently, is that really what I would find? Or would we actually find something different? Today, I want to talk about the difference between what it truly takes to be a patient-centric practice versus what the unfortunate commodity is that is a very self-centered, very team-first, very, honestly, office-centric practice. Now, you may be listening to that and you say, well, what's wrong with being team first? What's wrong with being me first? What's wrong with being office first? Well, the challenge with that is what patients are looking for today, what a new prospective patient is looking for in the next place that they're going to go to get what it is that they need is what is truly a patient-centric practice. So I want to break down what exactly a patient-centric practice is and allow you to reflect and kind of take an honest look and say, hey, am I acting as if I am truly putting the patient first, or are we doing something different? Are we accidentally, inadvertently, or unbeknownst to ourselves, actually living a very me first, us first, patient last practice, right? So why is this so important, right? So you may say, yeah, whatever, right? So, well, the reality is, right, study after study after study will show that, practices that prioritize the patient, put them first in how they set up their communication, in how they set up their processes and flows, see 30% higher patient satisfaction and 15% fewer missed appointments. The patient-centric practice, patient-centric care is not just about the clinical component. It is about improving the satisfaction, the retention, and ultimately, if you do those things, you have a patient who is actually more willing to comply to get you better outcomes. And so let's talk about the difference between a patient-centric practice and a practice-centric practice. And as I go through these, right, what you want to be doing is you want to be really listening and saying, okay, which one sounds more like me? And if it's hard for you to say, sounds more like me, maybe you need to look at it through the lens of which one sounds more like my friend who has a practice down the street. And then maybe it's, hey, well, what of what they do we do similarly? And if what they're doing is actually very practice-centric, not patient-centric, well, then how can we make the small changes, the incremental improvements to be more focused on what it is the patient wants, what is the patient looks for? Because when you consider the definition of patient centricity, okay, we've talked about this before. It is more hospitality than it is service. It is more anticipation than reactivity, right? It is actually going into your day through the lens of how are we going to over-deliver to the patient as they walk through the front door, not how are we going to make our lives as convenient as possible. And the magic is when you can actually have effective, efficient systems that are not only highly productive for you, but they're also what is going to get the patient what they want. And remember, it's 2026. What you're going to continue to see as we go forward is the persistent, seemingly undying trend of convenience, simplicity, and speed. So patients are going to want on their terms, when they want it, and they want it to be easy. And you can either say, well, that's just not the way the cookie crumbles, or you can do everything within your power to actually provide that. Because if you can do it, then the market will reward you. You will be creating more value for the customer, more value for the patient, more value in the marketplace. And that is when you're able to create significant growth, financial returns for you if you're the doctor, for the team members, get more opportunity, right? And ultimately, you get to serve more people inside your community. And so, as far as why this is so important and why you would want to be a patient-centric practice, right? Those are a few of the many, many reasons, And since the principles of influence would tell us that you're going to pay more attention if I tell you what you could lose versus what you stand to gain, right? I gave you a lot of things that you could gain by being more patient centric. But let's talk about the other side. Let's talk about what the cost of being self-centered, office-centered, us before the patient focused, right? Well, the cost is immense. The cost is the reputation of the practice. The cost is the fact that 68% of customers, of patients, will leave, not because you did anything wrong, not because they found something better, but simply because they felt a position of indifference from you, which means if you do not take active and clear steps towards improving the experience of the patient, towards making things more in the way that they would like them to happen, right? Well, if they don't see that, that is indifference. And that is why almost 70% of your patients will leave and go to someone else. So if you would like to lose patients, overspend on marketing, have team members who are disgruntled, not have a thriving practice at the end of 2026, please ignore everything I'm about to say because that's what's at stake. All right. Now, let's go ahead and dive in. Let's talk about the patient-centric practice versus the practice-centric practice, right? So number one, the patient-centric model is one that builds first around the needs and preferences of the patient. So Stephen Covey says that you want to begin with the end in mind. And so if we want to create a patient-centric practice, well, then that means you have to actually craft in your mind, okay, if I were the patient, right? The easiest way to do this is to put yourself in the shoes of the patient and ask yourself, how would I like this to go? Do you want things to be easy to do? Do you want minimal friction? Would you like to be able to get in somewhere within a reasonable period of time, right? And when you do go, would you like there to be pleasant people? And would you like them to seem as if they prepared for your arrival? And would you like for them to treat you as a person, not as a number, right? All of those things. If I ask you in that way, you're like, yes, of course I would. Well, how are we building that in systematically into the experience of the patient? Okay, because the flip side is we're building everything around the convenience of yourself, if you're the doctor, or yourself as the team member. So it's how can we create this web of convenience, of ease, of, like we'll get to it when we feel like it amongst the people who work inside the practice. Because when you do it that way, right? And what I want to be very clear is this often doesn't happen on purpose. So this practice I'm describing of everything is actually built around my convenience. Everything is built around not forcing any change or improvement by the team, right? That most often is not created intentionally. It is actually a buildup of repetitive decisions to not prioritize the patient when we make decisions about the systems, the processes, and how we're going to operate. Okay, so that's the first thing. Right? Then the patient-centric practice, right? You're going to listen, you're going to anticipate, you're going to empathize. Maybe, and then on the other side, you're just talking. You're not listening. Like if you have a culture of people in your office or you find yourself, you feel like you're over talking, right? So like there are people on our team who, you'll catch it and it's like, man, they're just talking. They just keep talking and keep talking and keep talking. And the more you talk, the less likely that person who's on the other end, whether it be the patient or somebody who's on the phone or somebody you're dealing with in your life outside of the office, if all you're doing is talking, there is a very good chance you're missing something. There's a very good chance you are actually prioritizing what you are looking for in that interaction, not what the other person's looking for, okay? And as we go through this, you'll kind of hear, oh, wait, that actually has a pretty significant correlation to how I could, should, and maybe need to operate in my interpersonal relationships outside of the practice. And that's not by mistake. When you do things right, they work everywhere. When you do things right, it's not just about what you're doing in the office. It can be applied across the board. So as we go through this, you'll notice like, oh, wait, so you're saying that to be more patient-centric, I should listen more and talk less? Oh, man, well, I could probably do that in life, too. I probably should do that in life. I know for myself, like anytime I'm in an environment and I catch myself like trying to speak more in the conversation, and I can feel it. Like I have this inner feeling, and I'm just like, "Ooh, why do I feel the need to like keep getting included in the like who's speaking right now?" It's actually completely unnecessary. So it's almost like I have this internal tick, and it's just like, "Ooh, man, you are talking too much. You are officially going over the line." So you may have that internal clock, you may not, but the difference is, you know, I spend a lot of time thinking about this. And so how much time do you spend thinking about when you interact with other people, how much you are talking versus listening, right? And that can sometimes be a sign that you're just ill prepared. Because a lot of times what you'll find is we have people who are team members, even doctors who are presenting treatment, and they're just talking and talking and talking and talking and talking, right? Well, why do you think you talk faster and more? It's because you're nervous, unprepared. So if you ever find yourself in a position, you're like, man, I just absolutely verbally vomited all over that person. Well, there's a pretty good chance it's because you didn't feel as if you were prepared to actually answer the question, to have the conversation, you name it, right? So when we work with teams, right, you may have a 10-minute new patient phone call. Well, we can get that down to like 2 minutes, be more effective. The patient actually leaves the conversation feeling better than they did than the 10-minute conversation, and the person's more likely to show up, right? Well, it's because we're focused on listening and doing what we need to do, not just having an unnecessary conversation, okay? All right? Patient-centric practice is proactive. They're not reactive, right? We talked about that. You know, when we talk about service versus hospitality, service is there's a problem, we got to deal with it. Hospitality, which is more patient-centric, right? When you think about what being hospitable is, it's actually anticipating the needs of the guest, right? If you think about the hotel. So in your practice, what are you doing to anticipate the needs of the guest, right? Begin with the end in mind. What would the ideal experience be? If you were the patient and you were going to go somewhere new, what are all the things that you don't like about the places you go? And then look at your office. Are you doing any of those things? And you got to be really honest with yourself, because it's harder to assess yourself than it is for sometimes to assess other people. It's very easy to assess other people. So if you do need to be assessed by someone else, you can reach out to us. We'll be happy to assess you. But you could also assess yourself and figure these things out. All right. Then the patient-centric practice is going to measure the experience and actually intentionally set KPIs around experience and whether or not patients are staying or going. So if you can't point to your patient retention statistics, if you can't point to the number of new patients that came from direct patient referrals last month, right? It simply means that you don't have your eye on the ball of the metrics that are actually indicating whether or not you're putting the patient first, right? So if you have no referrals and your retention is terrible, more likely than not, you're operating a very practice-centric model, right? You may think, oh, we're bringing people in. People love it when they're here. Well, of course they love it when they're there, because they're not going to tell you that they're not, because 70% of people are going to leave not because of something bad. And you have to remember the percentage of humans that are actually like high confront individuals is very low. So the likelihood of somebody coming into your office and saying, hey, I am very dissatisfied, right? You may have a few and you can remember them off the top of your head as I'm even giving this example. But most of them, 7 out of 10 at least, will never say anything. And we won't know. So that's where you have to look at some of those metrics of how many people are coming back for their second visit, how many people are coming for their third and their fourth. If you can get them there, then you most likely have the person for a long, long time. But if you only get them in the first time, they don't come back, we're not intentional about making it easy for them to do so, well, then we can't blame them. You can only look internally, all right? Okay, the second thing you want to be able to assess are your systems, okay? So what you want to look at is, what have you changed or improved, I say with a certain tone, or adjusted, right? Or what did somebody come into the office and change, right? That was under the guise of efficiency that actually stripped out the heart. Okay. So you're getting all kinds of technology and inundating you with all these things that it's going to make your workflows better and your processes and the automation is going to be great, right? Well, when's the last time you actually took a look at that and said, has this positively or negatively impacted the experience the customer is getting? Is this actually better for their experience, or is it only better for our convenience? Because again, both can be true. But as you look at your systems and you look at the new technologies you've implemented over the last year or consider implementing in 2026, you have to ask yourself, is this only making life better for us, or does it also make life better for the patient, right? I talked about this a lot. We did an episode on really assessing your tech stack, and that is the key takeaway from that episode. If you haven't already listened to it, it is very simple. Does this make the patient experience better? Does it get us to be more patient-centric, right? If so, then great. Whatever it's going to do for your internal systems to improve your efficiency or your workflows, that's awesome. But you got to go with the one that's actually going to improve the experience for the patient, or at least keep it the same. Because if it makes it worse for the sake of efficiency, then it's not the right move, or at least not the right move for somebody who's trying to do this the right way. All right. One great example, and this happens less and less over time, but I still see it happen every day. We're still blocking lunch to not answer calls. So you tell me, if a patient who has before work, the lunch hour, or after work to make their calls for their personal appointments, and you decide that we're going to just not do anything over lunch because we need a midday break, right? Well, who is that serving? Is it serving the team, or is it serving the patient? Because I would argue that 100 times out of 100, that has nothing to do with the patient experience. And if you think it does, I'm sorry, you're just wrong. So if you're going to say, we're going to do these things to change to it's fascinating. You can talk to somebody and you'll be like, all right, we're going to implement this system. We're going to train your people. We're going to work on increasing the patient-centric aspect of your new patient intake system, right? Well, then you find out, we're not answering 25% of the calls, and we shut down for an hour during lunch. Nobody answers the phone. It's like, okay, I think you're missing the plot here. The whole point is to actually shift the system to be more available and then change the behavior of what's actually being said or how we're actually taking in those inquiries. But if we're in 2026 still closing for an hour or an hour and a half to go to lunch and no one is covering the phone to handle anything that the patients might need, or a potential patient who wants to come into your practice who could be worth $10,000, I don't know what that is other than a blatant disregard to what is in the patient's best interest and a 100% sole focus on what is convenient for me. And if you're ever doing anything that is only convenient for you, not better for the patient, then you are doing it wrong. Okay. Get off that soapbox. There's little things. And as you assess your practice, your system, right, you want to look for some of these indicators. Okay. How many times are you saying we or I in the conversation with the patient? So a good example is if you're on the phone with an office, right? So if I call your office today and I say, hey, you guys taking new patients? Yeah, we are. Okay, cool. Can I schedule an appointment? Yeah, looks like I have at 2:00 tomorrow. Now, you may not think that's a big deal, but here's the flip side of that. Okay. Well, I have at 2:00. Okay. So what if 2:00 doesn't work? Again, most people aren't confrontational. I have a 2:00 tomorrow. Could be taken as, I have a 2:00, that's all I have. If that doesn't work for you, then I guess you're going to have to go find somewhere else. Now, the patient who calls in, already a little bit anxious, who is actually thinking to themselves, you know what? I'm going to find any excuse I can possibly find to not schedule with this practice because I actually don't like going to the doctor. I don't actually enjoy that because I'm let's just be honest, I'm a normal person and it's not at the top of my to-do list. It's not at the top of the things that I'm just fired up about, right? So you always have to remember that. The reason it's so important to be patient-centric is because most of the patients who reach out to you, if given the opportunity, are going to try and get out of it as quickly as possible, right? So if you have no-shows, if you have people who call and don't schedule, right? All of those people, if they really wanted to schedule, they would. However, the average conversion rate for a practice from a new patient phone call to somebody who actually shows up for the appointment is like 25, 30%. So you tell me whether or not those people who called needing a provider, having already called you, like, are they looking for the easy, like, are they trying to schedule no matter what you do? Or are they only going to schedule if you make it as easy as possible? The data would show that a new patient who's calling your practice, reaching out to your office, who you may be spending thousands of dollars to market to, they may want to schedule when they call, but if you don't make it easy, they will be perfectly happy moving along their day, not giving a damn about whether or not they schedule or not, because guess what? You gave them the out. Because whatever your system setup was, it was not putting them first. It was not centered around making it as easy and convenient as possible for that person who took that time to say, I'm finally going to do it. And they're met with a inadvertently practice-centric model. And it's not the team member's fault. It's not the patient's fault. It is the fault of whoever set up the system and whoever allows that to happen. So if you are a team leader, if you're an office manager, if you're a doctor who owns a practice, you have to set that bar. You have to say, hey, we are going to be patient-centric. We are not going to let the convenience of ourselves, right? And this is not easy. It's very simple, but it's harder to execute because you got to be willing to take the heat. Right? Because what do you think happens, right? So let's say you're like, I'm going to do that, right? So like, look at this. 72% of patients will switch providers after just 3 poor service experiences. 72%. Now, what is a poor service experience, right? Well, the data shows it's actually almost entirely administrative, not clinical at all. So think about your practice. Think about all the times you did good work on a patient. They decided to go somewhere else for some reason. It is almost always not the clinical capacity. So the amount of time, effort, energy, continuing education that gets put on the clinical component of the practice is necessary, but it's not going to solve this problem. You have to have it on the other side. Okay. 49% of patients say they'd pay more for practices with better customer experience. I think I've shared that statistic before, but I mean, that's astounding. Half of the people will pay more for a patient-centric practice, and 2/3 of the people will leave a non-patient-centric practice. So if in your area you assess, like, and we assess offices all the, like, I think we've assessed probably, hundreds of thousands of practices at this point, and the difference between the patient-centric and the non-patient-centric practices is astounding because 50% of the people will pay more for it and 72% of the people will leave if they don't get it. So think about it. What is easier to deal with? A team member or two who push back a little bit because you change a system to be more patient-centric just because they're not used to it, not because they actually don't want to serve the patient, right? It's actually just because we're like any human does that with change, right? So it's very normal, right? But that's discomfort. Well, you just got to ask yourself, what is more uncomfortable? That confrontation or 50% of your patients that would pay more if you did it and 70% of the patients who are going to leave the next time you don't do it for them? You tell me. That's a decision you have to make. But that's just the reality of how this works and why it's so important. Okay. All right. So let's kind of go through. So 5 things that you want to look at to assess the patient centricity of your practice, right? Now, if you'd like us to do this for you, again, you can do that. You can go to our website, take the 5-star challenge, schedule a call, kind of work on some strategy with somebody. But I just want to walk through these with you. So number 1, how easy is it to schedule with you? Like truly, how easy is it? I was speaking with a client the other day and he was mentioning, they just became part of a DSO and he's like, yeah, I don't know. I can't say what it is or anything like that because I don't think they're allowed to say these things. But he's like, yeah, I was talking to my guy and he said the offices that have used your systems, which are just applying patient centricity to the practice, perform 60% better than all the other portfolio practices. So you tell me, if that is effective or not. But they can answer these questions, okay? How easy is it to schedule? Truly. How easy is it for a new patient to schedule an appointment with you, and how easy is it for an existing patient to get back in for a recare visit? How long do they have to wait? How simple is the call process, right? Is it easy? All right. Number 2, do you ever make decisions that inconvenience the patient for your own comfort? Now, that's a hard one. And I've set that up in a few different ways already, but you got to ask yourself, and maybe even ask the people on your team, like, hey, do you think we're doing anything that is like, what are we hearing from the patients? Are we hearing anything about like any system changes, right? So if like you implemented a new system in the practice and you think it's going well, but we haven't actually tested it out, right? We don't actually know, right? Well, how many questions are you asking so you can listen to find out, hey, has this improved or worsened the experience just for our own convenience? Okay. Number 3, if a new patient called your practice today, would they feel as if that conversation was the number one priority on the mind of the person who answered it? Would they feel like it was the number one priority? Because you can hear that in somebody's voice. That is not something that is that's not a, I don't even know what the word is. It's like, it's something you can tangibly feel, right? When you get on the phone with somebody and there's like, they're literally having a conversation with somebody else in the practice while you're talking to them, or they put you on hold, but they don't even put you on hold. They just like put the phone down and you hear all the chatter in the background, or they can't even answer a basic question, or you say something and they clearly don't listen to it, right? So are they the number one priority? Okay. Number 4, do you measure experience or only production? Because in a short window, right, production is very easy to track. And production in a short period of time is not going to tell you everything you need to know about the experience. So you need to be tracking your production. But if you're not also tracking those experience metrics, like how many referrals, like how many referrals are you getting from your patients, from your team members, right? Then most likely you're missing the mark. Okay. And then number 5, are you training for the experience intentionally? So if you look at your calendar for 2026, you have to ask yourself this question, right? You have to take an honest look at the calendar and say, what are we doing? At what point are we having professional development for the people on the team to be as patient-centric as possible, to put the patient first, to improve the experience, so that as we're making these shifts for efficiency, as we're making the shifts to make things easier for the team, which is all good and well, we are also maximizing and prioritizing the experience that the patient gets when they come into the practice. And if you can do those things simultaneously, right, you're going to have a practice that is thriving, that is profitable, that patients talk about and want to share with the people that are in their life. So that's what you have to ask, okay? Is it easy to schedule? Are you making the patients the priority, truly? Are you making decisions for your convenience only and not actually for the experience of the patient? Are you training for the experience? And if you look at 2026 and there's nothing on the calendar to train your people around how to be more patient-centric, how to make sure that if somebody comes into your practice for the first time, the third time, or the 207th time, that they're getting an experience that is better than the one they had last time, right? Because again, indifference is why people leave. So they want to see improvement. So what's on the calendar? How can you change it? What are the things that you need to do to just move the needle, to just inch in the right direction slowly but surely and start to make momentum, right? And maybe you need to have a sit down with people on your team and say, and like take an honest look and ask yourself, what are we doing today that is convenient for us, but could be so much better for the patient? So I leave you with that question. What is easy for you that could be so much better for the patient. And if you make a few of those changes over the course of the next 90 days, pretty good chance you start to see some of those experience metrics increase. You see some more referrals come in, right? You have some better retention. People are starting to come back for their second, third, fourth appointments, right? And that is going to be where you start to make some progress here. But ultimately, it's calendar driven. I'd love to have a conversation with you and your team about it. Information in the show notes on how that works. But however you're going to go about doing it, whether it's through that or through any other method, right? You just have to have it on the calendar. Because if it's not there, most likely you get to this time next year, the same problems are there, but you have another 12 months of missed opportunity. We'll see you next time.